Some trust changes your life, and it only exists between a mother and her child. I'm not talking about my daughter Bella. I'm talking about the trust one put in my own mom when I handed her everything I had saved and said, "Take care of my baby while I'm gone." I was 26, heading out for an 18-month deployment, and the only thing that mattered was making sure my 5-year-old had everything she needed. I trusted my mom with my child, my money, and my peace of mind. When I came home, I found out exactly how much that trust was worth. And the person who finally told me the truth, a 7-year-old girl eating spaghetti at a Sunday dinner table, with absolutely no idea what she was saying. If you're new here, welcome. Hit subscribe if you want to follow along, and give this video a like if it speaks to you. Now let me tell you about my mom Linda, my daughter Bella, and the $240,000 that changed everything I thought I knew about my own family. My name is Aurora Reyes. I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, in a household that was loud and warm and full of food and opinions, and the particular energy of a family that loves each other in ways that are real but also complicated, which is to say a normal family, the kind where the love is genuine and the dysfunction runs right alongside it, and nobody ever fully separates the two. My parents, Frank and Linda Reyes, had been married for 32 years by the time this story begins. My dad, Frank, was a quiet man, steady and hardworking, the kind of man who expresses love through showing up and fixing things and never saying no when you need something, which is a good kind of love and also the kind that makes it easy to miss what is happening right next to him because he is so focused on being reliable that he has long since stopped being watchful. My mother, Linda, was the center of gravity in our family. That is the only way to put it. She was warm and funny, and she made the best tamales in the county, and she had a laugh that filled whatever room she was in, and she was also, underneath all of that, a woman who had a complicated relationship with money and an even more complicated relationship with accountability. I did not see the second part clearly when I was growing up because the first part was so present and so real that it drowned out the signals. Linda was the kind of person who was always in a bind, always a little short, always just coming out of something or going into something, and the family had organized itself around managing her financial chaos so quietly and so completely that none of us had ever named it for what it was. My brother Marco was 3 years older than me, and he was my mother's particular favorite in the way that certain sons become their mother's favorites, not obviously or cruelly, just in that unspoken way, where everything he did was reasonable and everything I did required a little more justification. Marco was not a bad person. He was someone who had learned, the way the non-favorite child in a family often learns, that the path of least resistance runs through agreeing with whoever holds the most power in the room. In my family, that was always Linda, and Marco had made his peace with that a long time ago. I enlisted in the Army at 22. I was 22 years old with a 2-year associate's degree, a baby I had not planned but who I loved with a completeness that surprised me every single day, and a need to build something stable for the two of us that my current situation was not providing. Bella's father had been out of the picture since before she was born, not dramatically, just gradually, and then completely, the way some men disappear, like smoke, leaving nothing behind except the absence of themselves. I was not bitter about it by the time I enlisted. I had moved past it with the practical efficiency of someone who does not have time to stay stuck because there is a child to feed. The Army was the most clarifying thing that had ever happened to me. I know that is not what everyone says, and I know it is not everyone's experience, but for me it was exactly that, a structure that matched something in my personality, a place where what you put in was directly connected to what you got out, where effort was visible and measurable and rewarded in ways that the civilian world, in my experience up to that point, had never been. I was good at it. I advanced. I saved money with the focused intensity of someone who has a child waiting at home and a goal that requires a number to be reached. And over 4 years of service, I had put away $240,000. Military pay, deployment bonuses, housing allowance saved rather than spent because I lived in the barracks rather than off base. $240,000 that represented 4 years of my life and every financial decision I had made in them. When the deployment orders came, 18 months in a region I am not going to specify because it is not the point of the story. I sat down with my mother at her kitchen table in San Antonio and I made a plan. Bella would stay with Linda and Frank. I would send an allotment from my pay every month for Bella's day-to-day expenses. And the $240,000 in my savings account, the account I had built over 4 years for Bella's future, for a house someday for her college, for the life I was working toward, would be transferred to my mother to hold. Not to spend, to hold. In case anything came up for Bella. In case there was a medical emergency or a school expense or something that the monthly allotment did not cover. I want you to understand the conversation we had at that table. I want you to understand that it was specific and detailed and that my mother looked me in the eye through the whole thing and said, yes, and I understand. And of course, Mija, I will take care of everything. She held Bella on her lap while we talked. And she looked like the grandmother in a movie about a grandmother, warm and dependable and entirely trustworthy. I flew out 3 days later, and I carried that image with me for 18 months as a comfort. My daughter is with my mother. Everything is fine. Deployment is its own world. I am not going to take you inside it in detail because that is a different story, but what I will tell you is that when you are deployed, you exist in a strange, suspended state where your real life, the one with your child and your family and your home and your plans, is on pause somewhere behind you, and the thing in front of you is the mission, which is all-consuming, and the combination of those two things means that you are simultaneously very far from everything you love and also thinking about it all the time, which is an exhausting way to live for 18 months. I called Bella on video chat 3 times a week whenever the time difference and the connection allowed. She told me about her kindergarten class and her best friend Jada and the cartoon she was watching on Saturday mornings. She looked healthy and happy, and she called my mother Grandma Linda the way she always had, with the easy comfort of a child who feels safe in the place she is in. I called my mother less often, which I am now able to understand was partly intuition operating below the level of conscious thought. The calls with Linda were always fine on the surface. Everything's good. Bella's doing great. Don't worry about a thing. But there was something in them that felt slightly off-key, slightly managed, and I had filed it under the category of being too far away to read people properly, and moved on because I had a job to do, and catastrophizing from 11,000 miles away was not going to help anyone. I came home in April. Bella was at my parents' house when I arrived, and she ran down the driveway. And I caught her and held her, and she smelled like the same children's shampoo she had always used, and she was 2 inches taller, and she said, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy," the way children say things they have been saving up, all the repetitions at once, and I held her for a long time on that driveway. And I did not let go until she made me. The first few weeks were the warm blur of reintegration. The word the Army uses for the process of becoming a person who lives in the regular world again rather than the mission world, and it is harder than it sounds and involves more emotional recalibration than most people outside of it realize. I was focused on Bella and on the transition and on figuring out what came next for us. I had plans. The $240,000 was the foundation of those plans. A down payment on a house in San Antonio, seed money for the paralegal certificate program I had been researching, a college fund account for Bella that I was going to set up the month I got back. I had mapped all of it out during the deployment, the way you map things out when you have long, quiet hours, and a goal that keeps you oriented. I asked my mother for the account transfer about 3 weeks after I got home. We were sitting in her kitchen, which is where everything in my family has always happened. And I said I was ready to start moving the money into the plans I had laid out, and I asked her to initiate the transfer back to my account. Linda put down her coffee cup. She looked at her hands for a moment, and then she looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before, which was the expression of a person who has been rehearsing a conversation and is now trying to remember which version they decided to go with. She said, "Aurora, that money is gone." I said, "What do you mean gone?" She said, "I mean it's been used. Raising a child for 18 months is expensive, Mija. There were clothes and school expenses and medical things, and the cost of everything going up. You don't understand what things cost when you're not here dealing with it every day." I sat very still. I had the particular stillness of someone whose internal systems have just received a signal that does not compute and are running every diagnostic simultaneously. I said, "The allotment covered her day-to-day expenses. The savings were for emergencies." "It all adds up," Linda said. Her voice had the tone of someone who has decided that the best defense is a posture of exhaustion, the implication being that the very fact of being challenged is proof of how little the challenger understands about what they are challenging. You weren't here. I was here every single day. I was the one handling everything. $240,000. I said, not a question, just the number in the air between us, requiring her to sit with the size of it. She said, "Children are expensive." My father was in the other room. I could hear the television. He did not come in. I do not know if he could hear us or if he had simply learned over 32 years of marriage to stay out of the rooms where Linda was managing something. Either way, he was not there, and his not being there was its own kind of answer to a question I had not asked yet. I asked for receipts. I asked for bank statements. I asked for any documentation of where $240,000 had gone in 18 months in the care of a 5 then 6-year-old child. Linda said she did not have records like that she had not known she was supposed to be keeping records, that it was insulting to be treated like she had done something wrong when she had spent 18 months raising my child while I was away. She said this last part with a particular emphasis on while I was away, as if the deployment had been a choice made at the expense of my daughter rather than a service made on her behalf and on behalf of the country. And I felt that framing land in my chest like something blunt. I left my parents' house that evening without resolving anything. I strapped Bella into her car seat, and I drove to the apartment I had rented 2 weeks earlier, a 2-bedroom in a decent part of San Antonio that I had been paying for out of my transition pay, and I put Bella to bed, and I sat at my kitchen table until 1 a.m. going over everything I could pull up on my phone, my own bank account, which showed the transfer out of my name 18 months ago, and nothing coming back in the monthly allotments I had sent, which totaled just under $22,000 for the deployment period, the balance I had built over 4 years of service, now showing as zero because it had been transferred to my mother and my mother had spent it. I am going to be honest about what those weeks felt like, because dishonesty about the hard parts is the thing that makes these stories feel false. I was not okay. I had come home from 18 months of deployment carrying the weight of that experience and the relief of being home and the joy of having my daughter back. And I had walked directly into the discovery that the person I had trusted most with the most important things in my life had taken everything I had built and spent it on God knows what, and was now sitting across a kitchen table telling me that children are expensive, as if that was a sentence that in any world added up to $240,000. I cried behind closed doors when Bella was asleep because Bella was 7 years old and did not need to carry my grief. I called my best friend Tasha, who had known me since basic training and who had the specific gift of saying exactly the right true thing without varnishing it. And she said, "Aurora, you have to get a lawyer." I said I didn't have the money for a lawyer because my money was gone. She said, "There are consultations that are free. You go to the consultation and then you figure out the rest." She was right, and I knew she was right. And I also knew that going to a lawyer meant making it official, making it the thing it already was, which was my mother stealing from me, and I needed a few more days to sit with that before I could say it out loud to a stranger in a professional setting. In the meantime, I started doing the one thing I have always done when I am falling apart on the inside, which is to build something on the outside. I enrolled in the paralegal certificate program at a community college in San Antonio that offered evening classes. I picked up a part-time position at a law office through a veterans employment program, answering phones and filing, the entry-level work that is unglamorous and necessary, and that I did with the same focused efficiency I brought to everything, because I had learned in the Army that the only way through a thing is through it, and the through requires showing up every single day whether you feel like it or not. I did not confront my mother again. Not yet. I was not ready, and I was not in a position financially or emotionally to make a move that required me to be solid in ways I was not yet solid. I let the situation sit on the shelf while I built the foundation under my feet, which is a thing that takes longer than you want it to, and that requires a patience with yourself that does not come naturally when you are angry and hurt and feel like the clock is ticking on the justice you deserve. The clock is not ticking the way it feels like it is. The truth has a long shelf life. It keeps. I also started paying closer attention to Bella's casual conversation in a way that I had not before, not because I was using my daughter as an investigative tool. I was not, and I would never, but because when you are trying to understand what your child's life was like for 18 months that you were not present for, you listen when she talks. And Bella talked the way 7-year-olds talk, which is to say constantly and without filter, and with the complete assumption that everything she says is welcome information, which is one of the most beautiful things about children that age, and which in this particular case was going to matter more than I knew. The Sunday dinner happened about 6 weeks after I got home. My parents had a standing Sunday dinner tradition that I had been attending since my return, partly because Bella expected it, and partly because I had not yet found the version of myself that knew how to stop showing up to things that were hurting me, which is a lesson that took more time to learn than I would like to admit. We were eating spaghetti, my mother's other signature dish, the one she made when she had not planned far enough ahead for tamales. And the conversation was the ordinary Sunday conversation of a family that is performing normalcy while at least one person in the room is sitting on something enormous. Bella was twirling spaghetti on her fork with the concentration of a child who has recently learned the technique and is proud of it. She was telling me about something that had happened at school that week, a story that involved her teacher and a hamster and a misunderstanding that had resolved itself. And she was mid-story when something she said connected to something else in her mind, the way things connect in the minds of children through associations that adults have long since stopped following. And she looked up from her spaghetti and said completely cheerfully, completely innocent, "Mommy, did you see Grandma, Linda's new house yet? The one in the hills?" The table went quiet in the way that tables go quiet when something has been said that certain people at the table know is significant, and one person does not know is significant at all. My mother's fork stopped moving. My father looked at his plate. Marco, who was sitting across from me, did something with his eyes that I will describe as a flinch, a small involuntary thing that lasted less than a second, but that I caught because I was watching. I said, in the steadiest voice I had, "What new house, baby?" Bella said, "The one Grandma got last year, with the big backyard and the pool. I went to a pool party there. It was so fun, Mommy. There was a water slide." She twirled more spaghetti. I thought you knew. I looked at my mother. Linda was looking at her plate. Her jaw was set in the way it gets when she has been caught in something and has not yet decided how to handle it, the brief moment before the response system kicks in and produces whatever version of the truth she has decided is manageable. I said calmly and quietly, "What house in the hills, Mom?" Linda said, "It's nothing. It's a rental. I just needed more space." Bella said helpfully, "It's really big, Mommy. And Grandma has a new car too, the one that's silver and smells new inside. I like the smell." She looked at my mother. "Remember you said I could pick the air freshener?" My mother did not answer Bella. She was looking at me. Marco cleared his throat and said, "Should we talk about something else?" I said, "No, Marco, I don't think we should." I looked at him directly and I watched him decide, in real time, which side of this he was going to be on, and I watched him make the decision he had been making his whole life, which was the side of least resistance. And I felt something for him that was not quite anger and not quite pity, but some combination of the two that has its own particular flavor. Bella, entirely unaware that she had just opened a door that had been locked for 6 weeks, said, "And Uncle Marco went on the trip to Cancun. He showed me pictures. There were really clear fish you could see underwater." She looked at Marco. "What are those fish called again? The colorful ones?" Marco said, "Tropical fish." I said, "When was this trip, Marco?" He said, "Aurora." I said, "When?" He looked at the table. Last August. Last August. When I was 9 months into my deployment, when I was sending money home every month for my daughter's expenses, when my $240,000 was sitting in an account with my mother's name on it that was apparently being used to fund a house in the hills with a pool and a silver car that smelled new and a trip to Cancun for my brother to look at tropical fish. I set my fork down. I put both hands flat on the table. I looked at my mother and I said very quietly, "The way you speak when you are saving your real voice for later, I want to see bank statements. All of them. From the month I left to the month I came home. Every transaction." I paused, "And I want them by the end of this week." Linda said, "You're making a scene in front of Bella." I said, "Bella, sweetheart, can you go watch TV in the living room for a little bit?" Bella slid off her chair without question, because she was 7 and she understood tone even when she did not understand content. She took her juice box with her. When I heard the television come on in the other room, I looked back at my mother and I said, "There is no version of this where a trip to Cancun and a house with a pool and a new car are line items in raising a 7-year-old. I need to know where the money went. All of it." My father said, from his end of the table, "Aurora, your mother worked very hard to—" "Dad," I said, "please don't." I looked at him. "You knew about the house." He was quiet. "You knew about the car." He looked at his hands. "Did you know it was my money?" The silence he gave me was the longest and the most honest thing my father said in that entire conversation, because it was an admission without the protection of words, and my father had spent 32 years giving Linda the protection of his silence, and here it was one more time at a Sunday dinner table over cold spaghetti, exactly the same as it had always been, except that now I was not a child who could not name it. I left the dinner with Bella and went home. I put her to bed. And I sat at my kitchen table, and I did not cry this time. I was past the crying phase. I was in the building phase. And the building phase requires different things than the crying phase. It requires lists and plans, and the specific cold clarity of a person who has decided that the hurt has been felt and metabolized and is now fuel. I went to a free legal consultation the next morning. The attorney, a woman named Diana Cho, who ran a small practice that handled civil cases and who had worked with veterans before, listened to me for 45 minutes without interrupting. She asked 3 questions at the end. She looked at the documentation I had brought, my bank records showing the transfer, the monthly allotment records, the timeline I had constructed. And she said, "This is civil fraud, potentially criminal fraud. You have a case. The question is how you want to pursue it." I said, "I want to pursue it the right way." She said, "The right way is usually the slow way." I said, "I've been doing things the slow way my whole life. I can handle slow." Diana became my attorney, and eventually, over the year that followed, something more like a mentor, in the way that certain professional relationships become personal ones when the stakes are high enough and the time spent is long enough and the person across the table turns out to be someone who sees you clearly. She filed the civil complaint. She sent the formal demand letter to my mother with the documentation attached, the bank records, the timeline, the specific accounting of where the $240,000 could demonstrably not have gone on child rearing for an 18-month period. The demand letter asked for full repayment and gave a 30-day response window. My mother hired an attorney of her own. His name was not important. What he did was important, which was to construct the argument that Linda had incurred legitimate expenses in raising my daughter, and that the money had been used for that purpose, and that any additional expenditures were a matter of Linda's personal finances and not connected to Aurora's funds. It was as Diana described it to me, with the professional neutrality of someone who has read a lot of bad legal arguments, not a strong position. But it was a position, which meant the process was going to take longer than the demand letter had hoped, which meant more time, more filings, more of the slow, grinding machinery of civil litigation doing its work while regular life continued on both sides of it. I am going to be honest about the next several months, because this is the part that people leave out of these stories, the part that is not dramatic in the movie sense, but that is the actual substance of surviving something like this. I went to my paralegal classes 3 evenings a week. I worked at the law office during the day, first answering phones, and then, as Diana hired me formally when my certificate program ended, doing actual paralegal work, research, filing, client intake, the daily operations of a working legal office. I was good at it in the same way I had been good at the Army, through the focused application of effort over time, through showing up when it would have been easier not to, through doing the unglamorous necessary work without needing the work to be glamorous to do it well. I built a life in the 2-bedroom apartment with Bella. We had a routine that was ours, the specific warm texture of a mother and daughter household. Dinner together every night, homework at the kitchen table, Saturday mornings that we protected fiercely from anything that wasn't just the 2 of us. Bella started 2nd grade and then 3rd grade, and she made friends and joined the school's art club and drew pictures that she taped to the refrigerator with the full conviction of someone who knows their work belongs on display. She was through all of the adult complexity happening around her, exactly what she had always been, steady and bright and entirely herself. And the watching of her being entirely herself was the thing that kept me oriented when the adult world felt like it was spinning. Marco called me 4 months after the Sunday dinner. He called on a Wednesday evening, and I almost did not answer. And then I did, because I have never been someone who runs from a conversation that needs to happen, even when I would very much prefer to. He said, "I've been thinking about what I knew and when I knew it." He said it the way people say things they have been composing for a long time. I knew about the house. She told me it was her own money, savings she had from before. I believed her because it was easier to believe her. A pause. I knew about the Cancun trip because I was on it. She said it was a gift for helping with Bella. His voice had the quality of someone dismantling something they had built to protect themselves. I didn't ask enough questions. That's on me. I said, "Did you know about my money?" He said, "I suspected something wasn't adding up. I didn't ask." Another pause. "I should have asked." I said, "Yes, you should have." He said, "I'm sorry, Aurora, for all of it." He said it simply and without the scaffolding of excuse that had held up his entire side of the conversation up to that point, just the plain apology sitting there in the space between us. I received it, not as absolution, not as the resolution of everything, but as a real thing from a real person who was beginning the work of being honest in a family that had not historically rewarded honesty. That mattered. It did not fix anything, but it mattered. And I have learned to hold those two things in the same hand without requiring them to reconcile. The civil case resolved 14 months after Diana filed the complaint. It resolved not in a courtroom, but in a mediation session in a conference room on a Tuesday morning, which is where most civil cases actually resolve, in fluorescent lit rooms with bottled water on the table and no audience to perform for. My mother's attorney had spent 14 months arguing a position that the documentation continued to contradict at every turn. And at the mediation, my mother sat across the table from me for the first time since the lawsuit had been filed. And she looked smaller than she had at the Sunday dinner, which she had looked smaller than she had at every previous point in my life, which is the progressive shrinking that happens to a person when the story they have been telling about themselves is being systematically replaced by the documented version. Linda had taken out a second mortgage on the new house in the hills, the house that had been purchased with my money, as the financial forensics Diana had commissioned had ultimately confirmed. She had a settlement amount available. It was not the full $240,000. It was $180,000 after legal costs, and the portion that was genuinely unrecoverable. And Diana had told me going in that this was the realistic outcome and that I should make my peace with the $60,000 gap before I walked into the room so that the gap did not become the enemy of the possible. I had made my peace with it. I sat across from my mother in that conference room and I looked at her directly the way I had learned to look at difficult things, not with aggression, not with performance, just with the steady, clear-eyed attention of someone who has decided to see exactly what is in front of them and not look away from it. I said, when the mediator gave me the opportunity to speak before we finalized the agreement, "I'm not here to destroy you. I never was. I'm here because what you did was wrong and because the money you took belonged to Bella as much as it belonged to me. And I will not sit quietly while my daughter's future is used to fund someone else's lifestyle." I paused. "I hope you understand the difference between what you had and what you took. I hope one day you can sit with that honestly." I paused one more time. "I still love you, but love and accountability are not opposites. I've learned that the hard way." My mother did not speak. Her attorney touched her arm. She signed the agreement. $180,000 was deposited to my account 45 days later. I sat at my kitchen table with Bella's drawings on the refrigerator, and I opened my banking app, and I looked at the number, and I thought about the 4 years it had taken to build it, and the 18 months it had taken to lose it, and the 14 months it had taken to fight for it. And I thought about the Sunday dinner and Bella twirling spaghetti and saying, "Mommy, did you see Grandma Linda's new house, the one in the hills?" And I thought about how the truth has a long shelf life and how it keeps and how it finds its way into the room eventually even when no one was trying to bring it there. I put $50,000 into a dedicated college fund for Bella. I put a down payment on a townhouse in a neighborhood I had researched for 6 months, 3 bedrooms, a small backyard, a kitchen with enough counter space to actually cook in. I kept the rest in a savings account that I built back up slowly and carefully over the following years because I had learned more thoroughly than most people ever need to what it costs to trust the wrong person with the thing you cannot afford to lose. I became someone who protects what she has built with the specific attention of a woman who has learned the price of inattention. Diana offered me a full-time position as her lead paralegal 8 months after the settlement. I took it. I am still there. I have been studying for the bar exam in the evenings, taking it one section at a time, because Diana said once, looking at the way I handled a research assignment, that I was going to be an excellent attorney, and I filed that away in the place where I keep things that people say when they mean them, and that deserve to be taken seriously. I am taking it seriously. It is slower than I would like, and it is exactly as difficult as anyone who has passed it will tell you it is. And I show up for it every week the same way I show up for everything, because the only way through is through. Bella is 9 years old now. She does not know the full story, and she will not until she is old enough to receive it without it becoming a weight she carries before she has the strength to carry it. What she knows is that she and I live in our house with the small backyard, where she has claimed a corner for a garden that she tends with a seriousness that makes me laugh out loud sometimes, and that on Saturday mornings we protect that time like it is sacred, and that her college fund exists, and she knows it exists because I have told her it exists, and that it is hers, and that no one can touch it. That last part one told her in the specific, simple language I have learned to use with children about important things. She said, "Like a treasure chest?" I said, "Exactly like a treasure chest." She seemed satisfied with that. She went back to her garden. My relationship with my mother is what it is, which is to say it is limited and boundaried and real within those limits. I do not pretend it is more than it is. Bella sees Linda occasionally, with parameters I have set clearly, and that have not been challenged because everyone involved understands, at this point, exactly where the lines are and what happens when they are crossed. I am not carrying hatred. I made a decision somewhere in the middle of all of this that hatred was too expensive a thing to maintain given everything else I was trying to build, and I set it down the way you set down something that is costing you more to hold than it could ever be worth to keep. What I have in its place is clarity, which is lighter and more durable and much more useful. James came into my life about a year after the settlement, through the most unremarkable possible channel, which was a work event that Diana organized and that I attended because she told me it was professionally useful, which it was in the conventional sense, and also in the sense of being where James was standing with 2 cups of coffee, one of which he offered me because the line at the coffee table was long, and he said he had gotten 1 extra by accident, which was possibly true and possibly not, but was in any case an effective opening. He is patient and steady and good with Bella in the specific way of a man who understands that a child's trust is earned and not assumed, and who therefore earns it slowly and with genuine care. He is not the center of the story I am telling you, but he is part of the life that the story built toward, and that is exactly the right proportion. There are things I know now that I did not know when I was 26 and sitting at my mother's kitchen table transferring everything I had into her hands with the complete and absolute trust of someone who has never had a reason not to trust. I know that trust is not something you extend in a lump sum. I know that love for a person and the ability to be trusted with something important are related but not the same thing. And confusing the two is one of the more expensive mistakes a person can make. I know that the truth, when it is solid and documented and patient, does not need to be loud. It does not need to perform or argue or escalate. It just needs to be the truth, which it already is, and to be set on a table in a well-lit room where the right people can read it. And after that, it tends to take care of itself. I know that a 7-year-old girl eating spaghetti and talking about a pool party and tropical fish in Cancun can shift the entire weight of a story that has been quietly crushing someone for months, not because she was trying to do anything except tell her mom about her life, but because children who feel safe tell you everything. And safety itself is a kind of truth-telling, and the whole chain of it starts with making one person in the world feel safe enough to speak. I made Bella safe. Through the deployment and the discovery and the lawsuit and the building and the rebuilding, I made her safe. That was the job. That was the whole thing. And standing in the small backyard of our house, watching her tend her little garden with the focused seriousness of a child who has decided this is important, that is what the $240,000 was always supposed to buy. Not the money itself. The life the money was meant to protect. The life we are living. We have it. We are living it. And nobody is touching it. If this story meant something to you, I want to hear about it in the comments. Tell me what part landed. Tell me if you have ever trusted someone with everything and found out too late what that trust was worth to them. Tell me where you are watching from today. I read every comment, and I will be in there. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do it now. There are more stories coming, and they are all built from the same place this one came from the decision to stop carrying what belongs to someone else, from the understanding that the slowest path forward is still forward. I will see you in the next one.